Hey, this is Cedric Youngelman, and welcome to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. This episode is brought to you by River, the financial institution built for all time. With 100% full reserve custody and zero fees on recurring orders, River allows you to buy and mine Bitcoin with ease. Build your Bitcoin mining fleet today with River. Plus, River offers unparalleled service and functionality, including tax optimization, entity accounts, inheritance planning, and instant buy volume. Use the link in the show notes to get started and earn up to $10,000 when you buy Bitcoin or miners at River. And for the ultimate in Bitcoin security and design, check out the Cold Card hardware wallet from CoinKite with built-in sleep at night technology. It's the only dedicated air-gapped ultra-secure hardware wallet for Bitcoin. CoinKite is a leader in security and hardware manufacture, established block 141,000. Maker of some of the most iconic Bitcoin products such as OpenDime, Cold Card, Block Lock, Sats Card, Tap Signer, and Sats Chip. Use the link in the show notes for 5% off your order. Don't trust, verify. And now, let's enter the Bitcoin matrix for this awesome rip with the Plate Licking Pleb on acceleration theory, procreation maximalism, plebs in real life, and the Canadian Bitcoin Conference.
What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Plate Licking Pleb is an accelerationist, procreation maximalist who's been working hard to put together the first ever Bitcoin conference in Canada. He's been shilling it nonstop, going on podcasts, and been fortunate enough to meet some super cool people. And honestly, it's shaping up to be an absolutely fantastic event. Plate, welcome to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. I'm excited to chat. You know, it's been a few months in the making. I think you reached out in March to let me know about the conference. And we reconnected, I think, in April or May and got some time together on the calendar. Conference is coming up. I just came out of the Miami conference. I'm not sure if you were there for that, if you came down from Canada, I'm assuming. But I'm kind of hyped about meeting people in person. And that's what this kind of spoke to me, is this first ever conference in Canada that I guess somehow you're a part of, the team putting it together or just helping out. I don't really know. You want to shill it. And it's been exciting. Down in Florida, I went to my first ever meetup here, local meetup, and Bitcoin Miami was awesome. And I've been to meetups elsewhere. And it's just, I'm really excited about meeting Bitcoiners in real space. So I think this is an opportunity to talk about an event coming up. But I'd love to hear a little bit about you first. I mean, what is your background? I'm assuming, I don't want to dox you, I'm assuming you're in Canada. But maybe what's your background, but before Bitcoin, a little bit about who you are?
Yeah. So excited to talk about all that stuff. Yeah. So I'm in Canada. I'm like maybe like 40 minutes away from Toronto. So my background is I'm a financial advisor in wealth management. A lot of people think that's kind of like just like investing, and that I like to say I help rich people pay less in taxes. So that's the way I put it. So that's kind of what my background is. You know, grew up pretty poor. Always kind of hated the establishment, hated teachers, school, things like that. And then I think that led me to maybe like libertarianism or anarchism even. But then from there, that's I think a big reason why Bitcoin resonated with me is finding Bitcoin. First of all, it was just to see, okay, maybe I can make some money with Bitcoin. But then it started going up after I bought it. So I said, okay, maybe I better learn a little bit more about this. And that's kind of where the rabbit hole started. And just from there, it's changed a lot. It's been a lot of meetups, doing stuff at the conference. Yeah, going down to Miami, meeting a bunch of really cool people, and learning about Bitcoin, stacking sats.
Right. Well, there's a lot there I can relate to. You know, I don't think I grew up hating the state, but I didn't like, maybe rules or rulers, maybe. And, there was, a little bit of fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. But it wasn't like the state was the biggest, baddest thing in my mind, or, I didn't think about it as a gang or anything like that. But I wonder what it's like. You mentioned you grew up poor. Now you work in wealth management and financial, sort of advisory. What is it like maybe working with uber rich people? How did you fall into this kind of work, or was this always something you were kind of studying and preparing for? And what do you make of the juxtaposition of sort of, maybe growing up the way you did, and then and working with the uber rich now, and helping them save money on taxes, and maybe watching them spending it frivolously or something?
Yeah, so for me, I got into it actually because I started out wanting to be a rock star, right? In bands and stuff like that, playing a lot of music. But then it was like, okay, it's highly unlikely that I'm going to make enough money to actually retire one day from playing music. I should probably learn how to, invest and build a future for myself. So first it was all about like rental real estate for me, reading about that and really saving a lot, and always had a very low time preference when it comes to spending. So just kind of hoarding cash, hoarding dollars, and reading more and more about investing, which turned into stocks, which turned into, being interested in wealth management. And then eventually I was like, okay, well, I should probably pursue a career in this. So I got all my required schooling done and everything like that. Um, and then I think I was like, I was 22 when I started in the business. And it's only more recently that it's more really wealthy people where the focus is, avoiding taxes and things like that. And I don't blame wealthy people for being wealthy. I think mostly they're just old people, right? It's not that they're super wealthy or high earners or anything like that. Most wealthy people were just born in the 1940s, right? And they're wealthy just because they're born in the 1940s, right? So because you're born in the 1940s, that means you bought a house in the 1960s. And that means that the price of your house has like 60x, right? During that time. Toronto and the greater Toronto area is notorious for the real estate and people who have become millionaires, multimillionaires, just by buying a house and paying a $20 monthly mortgage payment for $20 for 25 years. And then all of a sudden they're now sitting on $1 million, right? So most people who have wealth in this area just downsized, went from like a 3 bedroom, 2-story home. Their kids are gone, so they downsize into a bungalow. All of a sudden they have $1 million, right? So I don't blame people like that, but it's interesting dealing with them for sure, because they don't realize that they were huge benefactors of the Cantillon effect, right? They just think, oh yeah, like I was frugal, you know what I mean? I paid off all my debts, and they don't really realize that, like, okay, your education was $2,500, and the kids nowadays, it's like 25,000 per year is their education cost. So there's a disconnect there. I think those people will be the last to get Bitcoin because they probably need it the least. They're the least angry at the system.
I can see that. I see what you're saying. So then maybe a little bit more about your rabbit hole story. Do you remember like a little bit about it, like how you even heard about it to speculate, and what maybe got you, more than maybe price movement? What research maybe did you get at first, or did you find anything good to look at?
Yeah, so I first heard about Bitcoin. I'm pretty sure it was 2013, and that was because I found there was like a train. On the train, they left these like newspapers, community newspapers, and then just reading that on the train one time, and it had a story. I'm pretty sure it's about Silk Road, about how that was kind of getting busted and and shut down. And so that was just my first thought. I was like, okay, interesting. I guess there's internet money now, whatever. And then I think a year or two later, I had a friend approach me and say, hey, we should start mining Bitcoin. Like, I think we should start doing that. And at the time, it's like, okay, 2014, I don't have any money to do anything like that. And also, I barely know how to work my existing computer. I don't know how to work a more complicated computer than that. I'm not risking any money doing something like that. So then it's like denied Bitcoin a second time. And then my third time denying Bitcoin was in basically late 2017 when that bull run was coming to a climax. The company that I work for actually put out a piece saying, hey, a lot of clients are asking about Bitcoin. This is what you should say to them. And it was just along the lines of like, okay, well, there's no intrinsic value, there's no cash flows. It's a Ponzi. It's basically the tulip bulb craze all over again. You don't want to invest in Bitcoin. And I believed it. And I told clients that too in 2017. So it's kind of, I'm realizing 3 times I denied Bitcoin. It's like Peter denying Christ. But then basically in 2020, it was October of 2020, just the app that I used to buy stocks at the time started offering Bitcoin and Ethereum. And then so I put like $100 into it. But then the next day, if you know October 2020, the next day it was like $105 all of a sudden now. So then when it went up right away, I was like, oh, okay, maybe I did something right here. And so only when you have money in Bitcoin when you have skin in the game, that's when you think, okay, maybe I should research this a little bit. So I actually went to YouTube first, researching it, and that's like a mistake. I remember watching like BitBoy Crypto and stuff like that and being like, what the hell is this guy? Like, this is the worst, cringiest content I've ever seen. And then just seeing there's like those old documentaries where they interview all the like OG Bitcoiners and stuff like that. And I remember finding BTC sessions and being like, look at this guy's hair, this guy's gimmicky. But then eventually through Twitter, I had a couple like random NIM plebs who basically like online basically roasted me and blasted me for owning Ethereum too. Because for me at that time, it was like, oh, well, that's diversification. But they really roasted me and gave it to me hard. And then what that made me realize was like, these Bitcoin guys are very passionate. There must be something to that. So then it was, I think, February of 2021 was when I read the Bitcoin Standard. And that's when I really became a maximalist, sold like everything else and owned Bitcoin only. And really just realized that because prior my risk management strategy was diversification. After reading that, it's like, okay, the risk management strategy is that everything else is risky and Bitcoin is the only safe place to really put your money. It's the only place where you're not relying on individual humans to protect you, right? It's the only place where you can bet on humans as a whole rather than individual humans, right? If you buy the S&P index, that's very diversified. I'd say that's kind of like a second best bet to Bitcoin, in my opinion. But you're really relying on the people running the country and making sure that they keep having a favorable environment for businesses to operate. So yeah, you kind of realize that Bitcoin is the only option that really makes sense. And it just happens to be the one that's likely going to give you the most increase in purchasing power, but also most reliable to protect you over the long term as well.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Plate, how did you get the name Plate Licking Pleb?
Bitcoin to me is really about a grassroots movement, right? Bitcoin is bootstrapped from nothing, right? With no marketing team, right? It was, and it grew from there just by being itself, right? So I find that the grassroots is kind of like the plebs that build that up, right? It's regular people. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to be well connected to buy Bitcoin and take part in the revolution. So I always really related to the fact that Bitcoiners called themselves plebs. And then when you look into, okay, well, what exactly is a pleb? It's the plebeian class, which is poor people, right? People who might not have the manners to resist the temptation to lick the tasty steak juices off their plate at the end of a meal. So that's just something that I related to. I've been known to not waste any resources. So I changed my name to that at some point, and then it just stuck.
This is interesting. So I had to go. I did. You have some research in your banner. So it says lower class. An example of a plebeian is a member of the ancient Roman lower class. Plebeian is defined as relating to the common people or lacking in manners. An example of a plebeian act is licking food off of a plate. I always related to plebs. I think of myself as a pleb, but I never loved the word. And I think I was hesitant at first. I think it's because I never looked up the definition, but I think you could be a commoner without maybe lacking manners. So I saw it as like derogatory, to even call yourself a pleb. I think that was my initial reaction. I'm talking about 3 years ago. I like what it's getting at. I like we're all plebs. Everyone involved is just a pleb. I just don't like the. And I almost thought, and this is my impression. I'm relating my impression from like a pre-Bitcoin, hearing the term. But I also thought of like a pleb as maybe like an NPC. It's like the opposite of being part of the cause, like not being a part of a cause. It's fascinating. It's a great name that you picked for yourself. I think it's a good one. So then, where do you think, or how does Canada fit into all this? So maybe we could talk a little bit about being in Canada. Not all my guests. A lot of prominent Bitcoiners are from Canada, but Toronto, I don't know how far that was from the issue at hand with the truckers. But what was your take on that situation?
Yeah, so Canada's great for Bitcoiners. I'm not the first one to say it, I don't think, but there's a very strong correlation with Bitcoiners to tyrannical leaders. Now that'll tie into acceleration theory if we get into that later. But tyranny drives people to Bitcoin, right? There's not much in the way of a better teacher to teach you the importance of being able to control and hold your own wealth without anybody being able to take it from you or prevent you from spending it. There's not many better teachers than someone who's trying to take your wealth and trying to prevent you from spending it, right? So I think there's a lot of Bitcoiners in Canada just for that reason alone, because even though the trucking protest didn't really happen until like a year and 3 months ago, I think a lot of people saw the writing on the wall with it's just a socialist cesspool up here, right? So yeah, that was a really scary time for me. A lot of my family being unvaxxed and like thinking that they're going to lose their jobs. My sister actually went as far as like selling her house, buying a trailer with the thought that she was going to have to flee Canada, and leave and like travel to the States or somewhere where she would be accepted for her own medical decisions. And then my mom was like having like basically like anxiety like breakdown almost, right? Because it's like, okay, how do I protect myself? I have this house, I have these like a Canadian version of an IRA or a Canadian version of a Roth IRA that's like, okay, well the banks hold this stuff and the government is in bed with the banks, right? So like how do I protect my wealth at all, right? So I think it was really scary at that time. And then it prompted me at the time to also, I started tweeting a lot and telling people, even if you're not a Bitcoiner, or if you're a Bitcoiner and your family members aren't, take your cash out of the banks, right? Cash you can spend, people can't steal it from you, right? And I think there was thoughts that there might be a bank run at that time. I think the banks actually smelled that too, because they were being very holding their cash close to the chest at that time in Canada. Usually the rules for AML, which is anti-money laundering, is usually 10,000. Whereas at that time they were giving people a hard time for like 1,000. So if you want to take out $1,000, so like, well, you're gonna have to wait. Like, you know what I mean? Really, really, really giving people a hard time. So I was scared at that time, to be honest. But I think overall it's going to be a good thing. And that ties into accelerationism, is that a lot of people realized, okay, I need money that I can own, that people can't take away from me, that no one can say, okay, hey, I don't like the decisions you're making for you and your family and for your health. So therefore you can't spend money, or you can't move, you can't leave the country. So a lot of people were orange pilled because of that. So that was about I didn't go to Ottawa. That's about, I think that's like a 5 hour drive from where I am. But there were protests all across the country, right? The main one was in Ottawa, right? That's where all the trucks were. But in every major city, there were people protesting, and it was really a big thing. But the scariest thing is, like you said, you mentioned the NPCs. Um, is still the majority of people thought the truckers were dumb and babies for not wanting to get a little needle, and like that they were being ridiculous for not sacrificing a little needle just so you can protect someone else's grandma who lives 20,000 miles away who you've never met. I think that was part of the scary thing. And I think what Justin Trudeau was doing at the time is he was positioning the unvaxxed as a scapegoat, right? Saying that these are the people who you should blame. These are the people who cause all of our issues. Blame them. And that's, I think, what scared me the most, is because obviously this is not a very close comparison, but what it reminded me of was Hitler scapegoated the Jews, right? Hitler riled up all the Germans and got them angry at the Jews, and so angry over a number of years that they blamed all their problems on the Jews, right? And if you do that for years and years, and all the messaging you see on TV, on the news is all, hey, the Jews are bad, you're going to start to think that, right? If you're raised thinking that type of thing, and just one thing leads to another, and all of a sudden you're not allowed to travel, you're not allowed to work if you're unvaxxed, you're not allowed to leave the country, you're not allowed to have a bank account, right? Was where we were headed. So it's like, I'm thinking, okay, how many election cycles until there's unvaxxed gas chambers, right? So I don't want to seem insensitive saying that, but that's where my mind was at the time. Is that, how far away is that? I think a lot of people resonate with that, and so many people you see on Twitter now, you say, okay, well, what's your orange pill story? And they say, well, I knew about Bitcoin, but I really took self custody and put it into cold storage and really went all in on Bitcoin after the trucker convoy. So I think that was a big deal, and just the fact that people from all over the world talk about it. From little old Canada, it's not very often that like a Chad story comes from Canada. So I think it's important. I think it's one for the history books for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you bring all of that up. I definitely saw very similar parallels myself, even in the United States, where certain cities required medical papers to enter various kinds of establishments, from restaurants to bars to movie theaters, which is very reminiscent of the Holocaust. Part of it, I think Eric Kaysen was one of the first people that I saw publicly speaking about it on Twitter, or Bitcoin Twitter, because the medical papers and with Jews in Europe, it was about the Holocaust. It was about they were dirty, they were like vermin, they weren't clean, and so you had these sort of parallels. What I was astonished by, and kind of what I want to catch up on now, though, is what is the attitude now? So I'll preface that with one. During the trucker thing, how much of a disconnect did you see between the news and what other sources of information you were hearing about those events? And one of the reasons I asked that is, like, similar to what you just brought up with the Holocaust. It's like, how I can't believe, though, they tried to play this card, and that they thought they would get maybe more than 3 years out of it. Because I saw those, we were on that slippery slope, but this is a tough card to play for like 10 years. And maybe they were almost close to pulling that off. I don't know. What are attitudes like in Canada now? And how much of a disconnect is there between the mainstream news and what you hear in various circles?
Yeah. So at the time, it was just like brutal, because there's like one picture of one Nazi flag apparently at the protest. But there's no way of proving it. Like, it's one blurry picture. There's no way of proving that that's even one of the truckers or one of the supporters at all. My personal opinion is it was probably just someone who works for the government that they're like, hey, you got to go do this. We got to pin this the right way. It's probably Justin Trudeau's aide or something like that, right? So the fact that was where the news focused, right, rather than on the fact that, okay, well, maybe forced people in their houses was a little bit tyrannical, right? It's just so clear that the government or that the media is in bed with the government. I don't know if you know much about media in Canada, but it's very clear that the majority of media funding comes from the government in Canada, right? So it's so obvious for people who will actually click into it for even 2 seconds, the fact that it's just propaganda arm for the state, right? But that said, everybody loves the CBC. That's where you watch hockey on. I don't even know, what is it, Hockey Night in Canada? Is that Tuesdays or something? I'm not a sports guy, but everybody loves that, and so they have all these like nostalgic feelings about the media, and they love the CBC, and there's like free music and podcasts you can listen to on the CBC with pretty good content. So it's like people are psyoped into just having these warm fuzzy feelings about the CBC, but they don't realize that they're just straight up lying and focusing on the wrong things that are unimportant, just to kind of appease the statists that are in charge, right? The funny thing, and that one of the worst things that just grinds my gears is we had a strike recently, I think like earlier or last month, I guess. So the CRA is the Canada Revenue Agency. That's basically the IRS of Canada. And they went on strike. It's like 55,000 staff or something like that. And they went on strike and they were demanding higher wages and stuff. But where the irony is they were blocking ports, blocking ships from getting in, right? Which is exactly why the Emergency Act was called in Canada, right? Is because people were blocking the bridge in Windsor, right? So at that point, is like Trudeau's thoughts at that time was, okay, well, now the economy is being affected by this protest, so we have to shut it down. We have to, at all costs, shut it down, right? So for the union workers protesting at the port in Hamilton, blocking the economy, right? They had no such reaction, right? And in fact, they went right to the bargaining table with them and eventually came to a good deal, right? So just the total I don't know what word I'm looking for, just just how backwards that is. That's just different actions depending on who's protesting and depending what the cause is. It's just disgusting, right? But the general sentiment is people don't know or care, right? People think, oh yeah, those union workers do need some more money, or yeah, the anti-vaxxers are dumb, right? The anti-vaxxers is such an easy group to lump together and say that they're dumb, right? So it's tough. I think the tide has swayed a little bit, where more and more people over time are starting to side with the truckers, right? And just kind of know, like, yeah, this whole COVID crap was dumb. Like we went to such great lengths to prevent anybody from dying. Nobody I know died. No old people I know died, right? All my clients are in their 70s and 80s. Nobody died. and everybody got it too. And nobody died. So yeah, it's changing a little bit, but it's still not good up here. I think if we had another election right now, I think Trudeau would still stand a really good chance
of winning.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. One with I don't know if you remember the GoFundMe issue, where people trying to get money to truckers, and I think a mayor of, I think it was Ottawa, called up GoFundMe and was like, don't move the money. You would think that would be huge red flags for people. I don't know how that was portrayed on the CBC or something. You also mentioned the CRA, the Canadian Revenue Association or Authority, going on strike. I have a Bitcoin friend who's from Canada, who's down here in Florida, and sold his house, and apparently he had already gotten his visa, so he's no longer a Canadian citizen. He's, I think, American citizen, or however it works out. And so therefore, as a foreigner, like, they withhold like the majority of the profits above a certain amount for like almost an indefinite period of time to review. And it's supposed to be about, I don't know, 60, 90 days or whatever it is. And he keeps getting called. It's just, we haven't gotten to the paperwork. I don't know if it's because of strikes or just, but yeah, I remember traveling 20, 25 years ago. And as an American, a lot of people, like when I would go to Europe or Australia or New Zealand, people would say, tell everyone you're a Canadian. They hate Americans. They love Canadians. And I even remember over a period of time, it seemed like Canadians were getting router and router and acting more like Americans, or the way that the reason Americans weren't proud to be Americans, people thought Americans were rowdy, and say you're from Canada, but a lot of people looked up to Canada from America in terms of a lot of the programs, a lot of the socialist programs. So I'd like to talk about acceleration theory, because things seem like they've changed very quickly, or like attitudes towards what once thought as favorable policies and frameworks in Canada. Now it just doesn't seem in the same light. So what is acceleration theory?
Yeah, so I'll do my best to flesh it out. Basically, I think it's pretty obvious at this point that the general sentiment in every country is that people want big daddy government to take care of them more, right? They want more funding for this, more funding to that. They want more central planning, so more people to more power to the central authority to take money from rich people or for whoever they don't like and give it to whoever they do like or who they think deserves this money, right? So I think what accelerationism is, or acceleration theory, is that the best thing we can do is not to fight that, right? And that fighting that really just slows down the inevitable, right? I like to say that democracy leads to socialism, right? And for the obvious incentive reasons, right? If you are trying to get votes, you give people money. That's how you get votes, right? Socialism, I think, leads to communism, right? For the same reason. Communism leads to destruction of your society, right? Because it's not financially possible to keep a economy running that is centrally planned, right? We've seen that price controls don't work, right? We've seen that central planning leads to inflation. So it just doesn't work that way, right? So what a decelerationist would do is they would say, okay, well, let's get a good conservative politician in there who will, slow this down a little bit. But the reality is that no politician can actually reverse social programs. Because if you say, okay, well, we're going to cut some funding to education, and it's like, oh, he's the devil. He's cut social spending. He's so terrible, and then he gets elected out the next time, right? So all a conservative can do, or any politician, any decelerationist politician can do, is slow down the inevitable, right? So when okay, communism is coming, right? Late stage fiat inflation is coming, fiat slavery is coming, right? You can make a decision. You can say, okay, it's either going to be my grandkids who are suffering from this and living in this and living in those hard times and seeing the destruction of society, or it can be me who's the one suffering through that, right? And I think kicking the can down the road has been a fiat strategy for forever, right? So I think accelerationism is more, okay, well, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't go out and vote for Ron DeSantis to slow down the inevitable of what Biden's doing. Maybe we should just let things run their course. And it's under the premise that people learn through experience, right? People don't learn. I don't know if you ever tried to orange pill someone and they're just not getting it and they're fighting you on it. Have you ever just kept on trying to orange pill them? It doesn't
very
work.
early on.
It doesn't work if you just keep on trying, keep beating them over the head with it. You can't really orange pill someone with logic because there's too much. People vest their opinions on their personality, or the personality on their opinions, so they won't change at that point, right? But what does orange pill people is seeing that funds raised for an innocent trucker protest get frozen, right? That orange pilled a lot of people, right? Basically, it's like my daughter. We can't get her to stop reaching her hands up on the stove. When she stopped doing it, though?
When she got burned?
Was when I was cooking eggs and ground beef, and then she touched it with the tip of her finger, freaked out, hasn't touched it since, doesn't reach up. In fact, when she walks by the stove, she goes the long way around, right? So I think accelerationism is not trying to protect everybody from that is the state and all the wokeism and everything like that. It's letting people get burned, letting people get rug pulled by the state when they thought they were voting for the nicest party alive, but then all of a sudden they're the ones getting regulated and taxed into oblivion. All of a sudden, it's their business that is the one that isn't favorable from the woke police, right? Basically, hyperinflation is coming, right? If we elect conservative politicians, it might come a little later, right? People talk about how, okay, self-custody is too difficult. We need to make it more simple for people, right? It's Bitcoin is too tough for people who are not technically literate, right? When hyperinflation comes and the only thing the butcher is going to take from you to sell you meat is Bitcoin, you're going to learn how to use Bitcoin pretty damn quick, right? It's learned experience, and it's the pain that makes you learn, right? It's like the frog in boiling water, right? If we let this take too long, we're going to get boiled in the water, or our kids or grandkids are going to get boiled in the water, right? But if the water increases in temperature instantly, right? If it goes from regular to boiling in 1 second, then you have time to jump out still. So I think that's my best way of describing acceleration theory, at least.
All right, I hear you. So you sent me an interesting piece. What is acceleration theory by the Acceleration Pleb on Substack. I'm going to read a little bit from that. Bitcoin isn't about improving or coexisting with the legacy system. It is about starting a new one. It's less about financial gain and more about communicating value without the influence of so-called trusted intermediaries. Most can't understand Bitcoin because it does not abide by the limitations of the current system. So, what is the Sigma archetype?
So, I'm a bad person to ask about that. I think it's like, okay, betas are the NPCs that just kind of follow along and think what they're told, right? Alphas are, I guess, what would you call an alpha? Those are the leaders? Is that what
Sure.
they're? Yeah. So I think Sigmas are kind of like more like the lone wolf archetype. And I think you see a lot of Bitcoiners who are that way, right? The people who aren't so high on themselves, or don't think of themselves so highly that they aren't willing to be humble and learn something new. So that's my understanding of the Sigma, is that it's kind of people who are willing to go outside the box, maybe a little more esoteric in their thinking sometimes, that go against the grain and off the beaten path. That's my interpretation, at least. Yeah. That kid who wrote that, by the way, he's 21 years old. He's an interesting young chap who's got a promising future for sure. You guys will meet him at the Canadian conference if anyone's coming.
I'll read a little bit more from it. So, understanding Bitcoin demands a paradigm shift. Humanity has the right to store its wealth independently, immune to destruction, debasement, or tampering by any other entity. Bitcoiners have learned this through their unique lived experiences and first-hand knowledge in various fields, including technology, economics, computer science, and more, along with thousands of hours dedicated to learning about Bitcoin. By all appearances, it seldom crosses the minds of most people that we can function as a society that has rules without rulers. It is unlikely the masses can reach such a conclusion through education, as it will only appeal to a certain archetype. Those who do not fit the archetype will probably never come to embrace the philosophical movement behind Bitcoin. They will only learn to use it functionally, and that's okay. But we must agree that fiat is mathematically programmed to collapse, and it is not in the best interest of humanity to continue kicking the can of fiat down the road. Every extension of fiat's lifespan expands its capacity to inflict pain and suffering. We can already see examples of acceleration happening in third world countries. So, how fast do you think this can happen in a place like Canada or Australia, New Zealand, England, or America?
So you know what, I'm hesitant to put my own predictions. Like, people always want to talk about, okay, well, when's hyper Bitcoinization coming? I think it's near impossible to predict that. But when Balaji made his 90-day bet, I was not in the camp saying that's impossible, because I think that dominoes can fall quickly, right? And I think the stage has been being set for a long time. There were gold bugs in 1971, right, going nuts, saying, okay, this is over by the 80s, right? This whole fiat system is going to die by the 80s. 2008, there were more people. I think you had Lawrence Depart on your show. I'm not sure if he talked about it on the episode with you. But he said in 2008, he basically said, like, okay, this is done. This is going to be done for at any time now, that the fiat system is the Ponzi is over, right? People have been thinking that for a long time, right? So I think the stage has been set and the foundation for it to fall is definitely there, right? It's definitely a castle made of sand on sand. So I think it could happen very quickly, and it just depends on fiat, right? I don't think if it happens quickly, the catalyst is not people figured out Bitcoin really quick. The catalyst is that fiat failed really quick, so they had to figure out Bitcoin, right? I don't think it's going to be all of a sudden we get some really good influencers who are the best orange pillars ever, and then all of a sudden we have hyper Bitcoinization, right? I think it's from the accelerationist standpoint, it's going to be Joe Biden or Justin Trudeau who finally breaks the currency, and people just got to figure out some other way to buy their gas because no one wants to sell them any petrol or or anything, right? So they need something that people will actually take. So I think that's great, and that section you read, I think, is such a good description of acceleration theory. You put it much more eloquently than I did. So cheers to the acceleration pleb on that one. I just think we can accelerate, and there's going to be pain if we have hyper Bitcoinization in 90 days, right? Because there's a transition. There's going to be problems. There's going to be people who lose their jobs. I'll probably lose my job, to be honest, as navigating the million plus page tax code in Canada. I'll lose my job if we have hyper Bitcoinization in 90 days, right? But to me, that's worth it. I'd rather lose my job and potentially have some people die now, right, rather than 100 more years of slavery. So I think that's great. And thank you for reading from his thing. That's awesome. I'm just excited acceleration theory is getting out there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll read a little bit more from it in a second. I wouldn't call myself anything but a husband and a father. I don't want to be a part of any group or anything like that by label per se, but I adhere to this acceleration theory. I would label myself an accelerationist of sorts. I was born post 1971, so I've been in fiat my whole life. In meaning like just swimming in it, not in it like like, oh, I'm pro fiat, but 1998 we had long-term capital management, huge debacle. They bailed themselves out essentially. 2008 bailed themselves out. 2020, man, blew my mind on how much they were able to bail themselves out. And I get this idea of breaking the currency. I'm an accountant, and financial analyst by trade, and I've run the numbers, but boy, do they have an ability to just kick the can down the road. It's astounding, and it's almost hard to, I think we are betting against them, but it's really hard to bet against them. I want to read a little bit more from this piece, put more light on it. So, both options entail high degrees of discomfort. The former quickly and swiftly, and then into an age of prosperity, and the latter slow and painful with a high degree of uncertainty. We are currently presented with a choice, and a hard one at that. There is a quote by former Olympic weightlifter Jerry Gagoric that goes, "Hard choices, easy life, easy choices, hard life." The fact is that human existence is filled with pain, either the pain resulting from the consequences of easy choices or the pain of making the hard choice and the work that comes with it to exit the comfort zone in pursuit of higher truth and meaning. So what will you choose? The hard choice, acceleration, or the easy choice? The continued cycle of status empires perpetuated by the debasement of money, or the path of hyper-Bitcoinization and self-sovereignty? That's an interesting way of framing things. I try not to bring age into ideas, but I'm blown away this kid's 21, because these are kind of some really mature and deep thoughts, I think, or a way of looking at things. I love the quote, "Hard choices, easy life, easy choices, hard life." I think that really applies to the individual and to a lot of things like that. It's interesting when you put that up against the country. The United States of America is going through the debt ceiling right now. It's kind of a weird phenomenon where we raise our own credit card debt limit and give ourselves a different rate and play the game every time. But yeah, it's if the country made a hard choice and went through all the pain now, would that save lives later? I'd like to hear maybe your thoughts, especially I was also with Balaji's bet. I thought it wasn't out of the water to think that over a 90-day period, Bitcoin can do something like that. Obviously, maybe not this one. I don't know. Do you think it can hit 1 million by June 17th by the conference?
Yeah, I think it can. And that was the amazing thing that got me so bullish was the coincidence that when he made that 90-day bet, the conference was 90 days away. So his bet was that Bitcoin hits 1 million by June 17th, conference day. So that was like I was very excited about that one. But no, yeah, the quote that you read there, I think what Jared's referring to, I think what he's alluding to or talking about is when you say something about acceleration theory or about Balaji's bet about hyperinflation happening in 90 days, a lot of people come up and say, you don't want to be cheering for that. And you're a gutless person for cheering for hyperinflation that fast, because a lot of people will die and there'll be a lot of unemployment and riots and it won't be pretty. You don't want to see that. I think that's what Jared's referring to is that, what I think you do want that. The lion eats the antelope and he doesn't feel bad about it, right? We as Bitcoiners should not feel bad that we're crushing fiat, right? If you go back to first principles, to nature, right? There's a lot of BS that we talk about in this world as far as morals and being nice to people and everything like that. If something like hyperinflation happens, a lot of that goes away, right? Now you're thinking, okay, how's my family going to survive, right? Which one of my neighbors has the most canned food that I'm going to go steal from them, right? And I'm gutless for saying that, but that's just reality, right? When something like that happens, that's what happens, right? And if it happens that way, and it's going to be real bad for a bunch of people alive right now, a bunch of the adults alive right now, but it means that we're going to be living on a Bitcoin standard for my kids' generation and for their kids' generation. I think that's worth it rather than my grandkids being worse debt slave than I am. Right. My mortgage is got to be $580,000. Right. How much is my grandkids' mortgage going to be if we kick this can down the road that much further? Right. How much longer are they going to be inheriting their parents' mortgage because they took on an 80-year amortization? It's just not worth it. I don't want my grandkids to be slaves. I'd rather have to see some bad stuff now than any of that. So I think it could happen. I think you mentioned the ability of them to kick the can down the road. I think that's huge too, right? The government does a lot of 30-year bonds, 10-year bonds, and things like that. They don't have to, right? They can just do all 1-year bonds, all 5-year bonds. You know what I mean? And then those there's a lot less interest rate risk to the holders, right? If interest rates go up 100 basis points, a 1-year bond gets hurt a lot less than a 30-year bond. That's why everybody watches TLT, right? Which is the long-term treasury index fund. I forget what that lost. Greg Foss had a short against it last year. I think it lost like 30 or 40% or something in a year, which is bonds. But people don't realize that if you had an index of short-term 90-day bonds, right, money market, they lost like 1% last year, right? They had the same interest rate environment. So it's definitely possible to kick the can down the road. Not to mention there's the $1 trillion coin, right? There's all these random things that people are thinking up to try and extend this, right? I'd vote for the $1 trillion coin so they can exhaust their crazy options sooner than later, right? I forget what the question was. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I'll say Bitcoin is the $1 trillion coin.
Yeah.
I'll also you retweeted one of Pierre Rochard, one of our favorite guests and friends of the show, a tweet he put out. It's an interesting argument. There is an accelerationist argument for raising the debt ceiling to undermine the credibility of central bank monetary policy, which I think is kind of the inverse of a lot of the way people think of as maybe them not raising the debt ceiling as the accelerationist argument. I think kind of everything's accelerationist in a way because it's not going well. We've run the numbers. It's not sustainable, no matter how long they sustain it. I think this is a good time. I'd love to talk about the Canadian Bitcoin conference now. We've talked about a lot of what's going on in the world, and especially Canada. And, these opportunities, I think are, I don't want to say they're undervalued by Bitcoiners. That's not what I'm saying. But, they are valuable opportunities to get together with other like-minded people. I totally get the argument, you could just not go and save and put that into sats. There's some hoopla coming out of Bitcoin Miami about being part of this and that. I think, this is a much more focused experience, and an opportunity to come together. So I'd love to hear how you got involved, who are some of the other organizers, and maybe what's on hand at the conference.
Yeah, so come to the conference if you are comfortable parting with the sats, right? I'm a huge advocate for that, right? Stack the sats. You know what I mean? If you have extra funds, then consider coming to do something fun like this, right? There's something to be said about meeting a Bitcoiner in person when you go your whole life surrounded by normies who don't understand clown world, don't understand Bitcoin, don't understand fiat debasement and the predicament that we're in as a race right now. So I think some people it's just good for your mental health to talk to some Bitcoiners IRL for once. But yeah, I got involved basically right from the get-go. It's the main organizers are husband and wife team. The husband is a hardcore Bitcoin maxi. The wife is an events planner, and she basically does conferences for other people. Right, that's her day job. So then they kind of said, "Hey, let's do the first Canadian Bitcoin conference." We since found out that there actually were Canadian Bitcoin conferences much, much smaller in like 2013, 2014. So we found out we're technically not the first. But the way that I got involved was essentially so I was orange pilled late 2020, early 2021 became a maximalist. And around that time, I kind of said to myself, okay, it's lockdowns. I'm dying of boredom here in my apartment. I got to do something with my time. So I said, okay, I'm going to start a Bitcoin meetup. I put a tweet out and said, okay, meetup. You know what? I'm sick of never having met a Bitcoiner in real life. I'm starting this. I didn't really know what a meetup was, so I kind of ended up just like basically throwing a party. I got like sponsors and like it was free booze and stuff like that. I was at a bar and everyone had a really good time. I find out later that's not quite the traditional type of meetup. But at this meetup, or it might have been the second one or the third one, Dan and Manuela approached me and kind of introduced themselves and said like, "Hey, this is our thought." But that said, Bitcoiners are notorious for being suspicious of outsiders. So we need someone who kind of knows some people and maybe has a little bit of Twitter cred and can help us get the word out there. So I accepted. I said, okay, you know what? I'd love to help. I'd love to have a ticket for free. I'd love to meet Lawrence Lepard, Francis Pulio. I'd love to be backstage with these guys. That sounds amazing. So I've been doing a lot of work unpaid, but I'm paid in fun and satisfying my fanboy cravings. So basically, I've been kind of tweeting. I used to run the Twitter account, but since I had my second child, has been a little busy, so I've just pulled back from that one a bit. But basically, spreading the good word, doing podcasts, right, shilling it like you mentioned. But yeah, it's going to be a great time. It's downtown Toronto. It's June 17th and 18th, so it's a day and a half. We have speakers, vendors, there's book signings. There's going to be a VIP dinner. Basically a chance to connect with other Bitcoiners, right? Other Canadians. We do have some people coming in from the States too. Basically from the get-go, we made the decision to say, okay, this is going to be from Bitcoiners, for Bitcoiners, high signal, low noise, Bitcoin only. So kind of with that mantra is where we started. We had a couple people helping us, like Greg Foss. Greg Foss, I want to do a shout out. I like to say he's one of the hardest workers in Bitcoin. The guy is supposed to be retired, but he's working on like 10 different Bitcoin projects. If you reach out to him and say, "Hey, I have an opportunity to orange pill a C-suite executive at my company," he takes the call and he coaches you through that. And he says, "Okay, this is how you explain my CDS thesis, right?" But he helped us connect us with people, right? He's very well connected, of course, with prominent Bitcoiners. So he sent the emails out and said, "Hey, these guys are doing something in Canada. I'm very proud of my country despite what's going on in it. I think Canada needs this. Can you do me a solid and come down?" right? So we were able to get tons of good speakers like that. I can just list off a bunch if you don't mind. So Foss, of course. We got Tomer Strolight. I think he's playing one of his films, which is great, and he's a great guy, Toronto area as well. We have Francis Pulio, who's Canadian from Montreal, but who's been living in Costa Rica for I don't know 3 years or something like that. I'm really excited to meet him, and I'm also really proud just that he is willing to come back to Canada for this. And Bull Bitcoin, by the way, is the headline sponsor. They've been doing a lot of crazy, amazing things as far as KYC free Bitcoin in Canada, which there's not a lot of options for. So excited to meet him. And by the way, he tweeted a couple minutes before the show, all caps, accelerate. So I think he's officially in the accelerationist camp as well. We got Eric Yates, who's the author of Seventh Property. If you haven't read that, you should. Derek Ross. We have BTC Sessions, who's doing a breakout session with D from CoinKite on the cold card setup, essentially. So it's going to be a more intimate conference, right? It's not going to be Miami where there's like 20,000 people and like pump up techno music blaring, right? It's going to be maybe 300 people, but with breakout rooms of 40 people where the speakers are actually doing a Q&A where you can ask questions and get answers and actually have a dialogue, right? So a little different of a vibe. Other people, we have Brad Mills, we got Frank Holmes, who's the CEO of Hive Mining, which is a publicly traded mining company from Canada. We have Ali from Tahini's. If you know Tahini's, they're notorious for putting their company on a Bitcoin standard. I think before MicroStrategy, to be honest, I might be wrong, don't quote me on that, but I think they might have done that before MicroStrategy did. Much smaller company, of course, but they're very fast growing. So he's talking about Bitcoin in business. We have Lawrence Lepard, who you had as a guest recently, who I'm very excited to meet in person. And one story about Lawrence just speaks to the small Bitcoin community and how awesome it is he jumped into my DMs and just said, "Hey, looking forward to the event. Here's my cell phone. Like text me. Let's meet up for a drink or something like that." So it's just awesome. It's like someone that I look up to and like listen to and think he's a genius, listen to on your podcast. And then he just kind of wants to connect. Like it's like Bitcoin is just awesome for stuff like that. Beyond that, we have Luke Broyles, who you also had on recently. Who I think is going to be very big this next cycle for new Bitcoiners. I think he kind of puts the Bitcoin 101 story in a new light. That's going to be really big for the next time around, right? Saying things in a new way. Another big one is we have Stefan Livera, who's literally doing a Q&A. That's what his session is, and that's going to be to close out the event. Beyond that, we have John Lister from Sat Street, which is a like a high net worth, family office, Bitcoin trading desk in Canada. Lots of people. Troy Cross is on a panel talking about nuclear Bitcoin mining in Canada. Right, we have a lot of nuclear plants in my area, especially 3 in Ontario. But basically going to be a great event. We have the Canadian Bitcoiners podcast. So I think you know Joey and Len. Hey, who's tweeting at you? I saw.
Yeah, I think Joey Tweets is subtweeting us and trolling us. We could touch on that in a little bit. We'll put that thought bubble on hold. But yeah, this is a tremendous lineup here. This Bitcoin only conference is going to celebrate the ideas, concepts, principles, and technologies that make up the Bitcoin community. And the focus will be on the Canadian marketplace, including real estate, gold, and silver, and the impact of all this will have on the future for everyone. But these speakers, Francis Pulio, I've been trying to have on the show. He said yes a bunch of times. He's very hard to pin down. I just think he's more interested in doing than talking. I did get to meet him a couple times. Once at the beefsteak, and he was shucking oysters for me almost personally. It was phenomenal. BTC Sessions, I'd love to get him on the show. I've got to meet him a couple times at conferences. I'd like to get him on the show. Foss and Lepard have both been on the show. They're bulldogs. The passion they have for Bitcoin, why they're even working at this point in their lives when they probably don't need to. Even if they need to, it doesn't matter. They're just so passionate about Bitcoin. It's awesome. Tomer is a kindred spirit and a kind soul. He's been on the show, I think, 4 times now. Stefan Livera has been on the show, and he's a great podcaster. That Q&A is going to be phenomenal. Troy Cross, hopefully on soon. Luke Broyles has been on the show, and I agree with you. He's able to articulate these ideas and concepts extremely well. Probably like Sailor-esque, and yeah, he probably will, or he is blowing up. Eric Yates has that great book, The Seventh Property. Brad Mills is an interesting character, and Ali Haman has been on the show. He's episode number 4. He bear hugged me at Safe's dinner down in Miami. He's just an awesome soul. They've grown that franchise during this pandemic or whatever era we're in, from like 4 locations to almost 30 now, or 30 plus. And the ideas he has for the Lightning Network and marketing, retail, and consumers and the restaurant business are really, really, he's just gonna level up, Ali. So big up to Ali. And that conference looks awesome. So then moving on a bit, do you think the halving is priced in?
No. I tweeted about this yesterday after a couple drinks. No, the halving is not priced in. If the halving was priced in, fiat would not exist. Basically next year we're going to have the scarcest asset with the lowest or highest, or however you say it, stock to flow ratio that has ever existed, right? Beyond as it surpasses gold. So we're going to see huge price appreciation because of that. So clearly the next halving is not priced in. The fact that a new halving occurs every 4 years is definitely not priced in. People underestimate the fact that Bitcoin is at 29,000, 28,000 right now, right? Every day, pretty much 900 Bitcoins come to market, right? Because miners right now don't have that free VC money anymore, right? They aren't flush with cash, right? Miners now, by definition, a miner has costs that are very close to their revenue and very thin profit margins, which means that they have to sell most of the corn that they're mining. So there's almost 900 Bitcoins coming to market every day, right? But the price is staying stagnant, right? The price is holding strong where it is, because you DCA every day, I DCA every day, right? Everybody listening, all the accelerationists DCA every day, all the wizard people buying their ordinals or bricks or whatever you call it. They're DCAing every day, right? And they're DCAing 900 Bitcoins per day. All of us combined are buying 900 Bitcoins per day, right? On whatever it is, March 24th of 2024, whenever it's set to be, it's only going to be 450 Bitcoins that are sold per day, right? So that's not priced in, because right now the price is holding steady where it is, right? If the halvings were priced in, everybody would own Bitcoin. Everybody would be stacking as hard as they possibly could. And fiat would be gone, because if everybody knew that, no one would use fiat anymore, right? There would be no point. So to me, it's very obvious that they're nowhere even close to priced in. I don't know how many people actually own Bitcoin. There's a lot of different estimates. I think it's very few, especially people who are like maximalists, who are self-custodying their Bitcoin. I know that of like my 7 degrees of separation, the maybe 1,600 people who I know on a first name basis, highly unlikely that any of those people are Bitcoin maximalists, right? So if the halving was priced in, they would all be Bitcoin maximalists. So it's not, because I'm one out of 1,600 people who understand. So to me, that's so obvious. I don't know how people debate that. People talk about the efficient market hypothesis, right? Which is from a book from the 80s called A Random Walk Down Wall Street. And that's what they say. Oh, everything is priced in because humans are rational, investors are rational. So they take all available information and they buy and sell accordingly, right? That's what that means. Is this priced in, right? So people think, well, everything's always priced in, right? So that's why you should invest in index funds and not stocks. But it's just so untrue, because you can't know everything, right? Even though you're a rational investor, you can't know everything, right? If you've been focusing on reading balance sheets and profit and loss statements for different tech companies your whole life, right? Or whatever, different auto sector companies or things like that, you don't have the time to know about Bitcoin. So how can you, as a participant in the economy and in the markets, price in the Bitcoin halving, right? So people don't know, people don't have the time to study everything, right? And not to mention, most people are just entrusting their money with their money manager, right? They're to people like me, right? To just buy the 60/40 portfolio that my manager says I'm allowed to sell. So it's not like I'm using my leverage of knowledge of the markets. It's not like I'm putting my clients 100% into Bitcoin because I know about the halving. I can't do that. I'd lose my job, right? So it's not priced in. That's the most obvious thing to me. I can't believe that people debate that still.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, that's what debate's about. I think I'm on your team, but it remains to be seen, or at least it's debated. What is a procreation maximalist?
Yeah. So as far as I know, I made that up. I think I might be the only one who's officially a procreation maximalist. I know there's a lot of people who talk about it. I know Katie the Russian actually was tweets stuff about that. And also just like the trad values influencers you see on Twitter nowadays too. I think are procreation maximalists, even though they don't know it. Basically, the only lasting impact you can have 7 generations from now is your bloodline, right? Unless you are inventing the car or inventing Bitcoin, or you know what I mean, doing something that is historically impactful that's going to imprint your name on history for 1,000 years. Unless you're doing that, which I know I'm not, by the way, you have to have children if you want to make a lasting impact on this earth, right? So I think being a procreation maximalist is accepting that, right? And accepting that from first principles, the only way to quantify success in this life is number of children, quantity of children, right? If we're talking about the game of survival of the fittest, right? And how do you win that? You win that by having the maximum quantity of children, right? Stacking sats is helpful, right? That you can maybe guarantee your children's place and status in the world, right? But eventually one of your grandkids is going to be gambling all that away, right? Eventually one of your kids is going to squander whatever wealth you've built. Wealth, if you run a family business and you have a very successful family business and worth $10 million, traditionally it doesn't last 3 generations, right? Very rare to last any further than that because just family dynamics, right? If you're a very hard worker, you're absent from your kids. Therefore, your kids don't have the same values as you. Therefore, they're squandering money instead of continuing to build a business, right? So stacking sats is not going to imprint your name on history for 10,000 years, right? But having children is, right? The only lasting impact you can have on the world is to have many, many children. And beyond that, if we want to make a change in the world, you can be the weed that sprouts up in a garden, right? Because they just sprout up across enemy lines, right? Just simply by procreating, right? And I think let's say hyper Bitcoinization isn't in 90 days. I think that's a way we can do it is by raising Bitcoiners across enemy lines, across the state, right? Bring down the state that way, right? If that makes sense. Just by having kids. Right. I think having kids is one of the lowest time preference things that you can do.
I agree there. And, family sizes are definitely shrinking. I wonder how big families would get on a Bitcoin standard.
I bet you they go right back to what they were, in pioneer days and everything like that, right? 12 kids, stuff like that, right? And also, like when you're on a farm or like you're doing something that requires more hands to make more money, or to even sustain yourself better, right? Kids are an asset, not a liability, right? The way we live now, where okay, well, my job is to go sit at a desk and push papers for a bureaucrat. My kids are a liability at that point because all they're doing is going off to college to learn how to be a bureaucrat pushing paper at a desk, right? So that's a liability, right? Whereas if you're on a Bitcoin standard, if we're back to real world value being added, right? Real proof of work that isn't people like me running imaginary numbers on a computer, figuring out how to avoid paying imaginary taxes from the arbitrary God King. That then a child is an asset, because they, even at 4 years old, they can go and pick the blueberries for us to have with our breakfast tomorrow, right? So I think, yeah, kids are it's going back to 12 kids per family for sure,
Wow.
in my opinion.
That'd be awesome. What low time preference habits have you adopted that have most benefited and improved your day-to-day life?
So I'm like a cheap mofo, and I always have been. So I'd like basically do not spend money hardly ever. So like my wife and I share a 2008 Honda. My wife cuts my hair, if you can't tell. And basically she's like that too. Luckily, I found a woman who shares the same money habits as me. We don't buy something unless it's off Facebook Marketplace or Kijiji, right? We don't pay full price for something. If we buy a house, it's a fixer upper, right? That has very squeaky floors and carpet from the 1970s and a moldy basement. That's just kind of the way that we like doing things. So I'm very, very low time preference from a financial and spending habits perspective. Some places that I lack in time preference, I mentioned yesterday, I had a couple drinks, right? Low time or high time preference pastime, having a couple drinks, right? But I guess, what have I adopted that have helped me? I think finding Bitcoin has changed me a lot. I started working out post Bitcoin, realizing that my health is something to take seriously, right? I've started eating meat. I quit smoking weed, actually, which is the mental clarity, the just less anxiety, right? I'd have anxiety about conversations, whereas now I don't, right? So lots of things like that have really changed. I think also just thinking long term, as far as business and the way I interact with clients as well. Rather than looking for the next sale, it's more, okay, how do I cultivate the relationship to maybe not sell something right now, but make the client feel like they are well looked after, so that they're willing to refer me, right, instead. So I think just changes like that, and low time preference, that not necessarily Bitcoin, but Bitcoiners and interacting with Bitcoiners on Twitter has taught me, and just learning a ton of things that way.
Right. Cool. So then, if you could orange pill anyone in the world named Justin Trudeau, would you?
If I could orange pill Justin Trudeau,
Yeah.
Justin Trudeau is definitely already orange pilled. That's why he does his stuff. I don't know if you saw the video recently of him saying the new LGBTQ acronym. It's like 17 letters now, but he just had it so rehearsed and just saying it. If he's not an accelerationist, I don't know who is. But he's orange pilled. I can't see him not. Just the amount of spending and the amount of fiat debasement that guy has engaged in. He's got to be a closet Bitcoiner, and because everything he's doing is pushing people towards Bitcoin. So unless he's as dumb as people think he is, which I don't think, he must be a Bitcoiner. So let's assume he's not a Bitcoiner. Would I orange pill him? No. No, I wouldn't. I'd let him keep doing what he's doing for sure.
That's funny. Sometimes I ask what happens if Bitcoin doesn't win. I want to ask you what happens when Bitcoin wins.
Okay,
like meaning like what's the world look like then, maybe, to you? Not when, like, give a prediction when, but like, what would the world be like if Bitcoin wins, or when Bitcoin wins?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My best guess is that I think we will lose some of the luxuries we have today, right? Things that are seen as luxury, as we get back to a more slower paced slower paced day. You know what I mean? If we're not having large scale industrial farming, right, where everybody's eating stuff that's half corn, half soy, right, that means that we'll have to spend more time cooking our own food and raising our own cattle, right? So I think that whether you like it or not, or whether people enjoy it or not, they'll be spending more time in their own gardens, right? Because I don't think that the current system of massive grocery chains and farmers paying $10 million for 100 acres of farmland can continue the way it is, and I don't think it would continue as people care more about what they eat. So between that and just the fact that people aren't financing debt to get whatever they want whenever they want, I think from a quick glance, without realizing the values that we've reclaimed as far as, having big families, like we said, and things like that, I think that it could look a little bit like a less severe Dark Ages, right? I think that we could forget some things as we go into the Bitcoin standard, just because there is some efficiency with having huge corporations and huge governments taking care of us. There's obviously all the negative side effects of inflation and all of us getting fat and things like that, but a lot of time is saved by the fact that we have a lot of division of labor, and there are tons of people who have useless jobs right now that are just based on bureaucracy and hiring more administrators to try and solve problems where you actually need more doctors. So a lot of people will be jobless. That's why I think that we could see a little bit of a dark ages for a reason like that, because a lot of people won't have an income, and if they weren't Bitcoiners, they don't have a lot to sell to get to their food, right? So a lot of people see that as a negative light, and I do think we could recover from that quickly, but I see that positively. I'd rather go through that now than wait another 500 years before we go through that.
Okay, yeah, I mean it's a very counterintuitive sort of notion. I think it's interesting to kind of look at things from a different angle. I'm hoping for more efficiencies, maybe just as much division of labor, and maybe more free time that people can manage because there's more maybe wealth or more efficiency. But I think you bring up interesting points that are definitely something to think about. So then as we roll out here, then, I don't know if you want to comment on Joey just trolling us hard, but this has been incredibly dope, catching up with you, Plate, and getting to know you. I'll leave it to you for any final words, any parting words, and let people know where they can find you, and obviously get tickets to the Bitcoin conference. The only other thing we didn't bring up is the Bitcoin rodeo, and that you guys seem to be offering a little deal there. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, that one's good. That's Dave Bradley from the Bitcoin Well. So he runs Bitcoin Brains, which is a company, and the Bitcoin Well, which is Bitcoin ATMs, KYC free in Canada, all around Canada. But I think it's him. I think BTC Sessions is involved as well. But it's in Calgary, similar style conference, I think, but kind of out there. So we have a discount if you buy tickets to both. So I would say definitely go to that too. I kind of wish that I could take a flight out there too and go see that too. But I would definitely encourage anyone to go there. You can find tickets for whether you do the bundle or whether you do just the Toronto conference. It's CanadianBitcoinConf.com or at CDN Bitcoin Conf. So go there to get tickets. If you are Joey Tweets, you got to put your money where your mouth is and start actually running these 40-yard dashes. I don't know if you've heard their podcast, but they ask every guest at the end of it. For example, they say, "Okay, Cedric, you look like a pretty fit guy. You look like you might be pretty fast and wiry. Who do you think you would win in a race between you and Michael Saylor, 40-yard dash? Who do you think would win?" So that's what they do. They pit every one of their guests with that, right? So we've been bugging them online and saying, like, hey, Joey, like when 40-yard dash is, right, I'm gonna crush you. So that's what I'd say to Joey is I'm gonna crush you in a 40-yard dash. But yeah, Bitcoin conference. You can find me. I'm at Plate Licker _21M. I like to tweet about everything we talked about today. Fuck the state.
Word. This has been so dope. Thank you so much. Yo, that's a wrap on today's episode of the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. We hope you found it informative and engaging. I'd like to take a moment to thank our listeners for tuning in and supporting us. I couldn't do it without you. If you're interested in supporting the show, there are a few ways you can do so. You can leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform, which helps us reach a wider audience. You can also stream the show on the Fountain app and boost it for sats. And finally, we're always looking for sponsors who align with our values and mission. If you're interested in partnering with us, please reach out to me at cedricyoungelman@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Bitcoin Matrix podcast.